Hey, Salvador Briggman here. Welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified YouTube channel. And today I want to talk about the difference between Kickstarter and imagination, what you think is going to happen, and reality. And obviously the goal here is not to dissuade you from running a campaign or to make it overhyped for running a Kickstarter campaign. It's more of just giving you a sense of reality, right? That's really why I wanted to make this video. I think the first one is very common and something that I myself, when I was first getting started in this niche, would also think the same thing. So you're not in the wrong at all if you think this way. A lot of the times when we're considering putting together a Kickstarter campaign, we think it's going to be something like you can throw it up in maybe 2 days or 3 days, maybe a week at most or 2 weeks, just because you're putting together what your pitch is, right? Your video, your rewards, and it seems like it's not going to take very long. And that's led to a lot of issues because for someone who doesn't, anticipate how long it actually takes to do a campaign and also the preparation needed and all the work that goes into the page and the rewards and shipping and everything, it can be a little bit annoying and frustrating, right? Because why is this taking so long? So I just want to give you an idea, a realistic idea of how long it would take to put together a Kickstarter campaign page and all this kind of stuff. So let's just say from the very beginning, you don't have a video, you don't have any graphics, you don't have a text, anything like that. It's probably going to take you, I'd say, at least 3, maybe 4 weeks to put together a really quality looking page. And that's because a lot of review process happens where you get the video, you need to get video edits. While that's happening, you're getting together the page itself, the copywriting, you're refining the copy, then you're getting graphics made, really nice looking graphics to embed on the page, right? And you're having to fool around a bit with layout there. Kickstarter editor is not the best. I recommend actually starting with something in Google Docs, right? And then you can always pour it over to the Kickstarter editor. And you're also having to figure out the reward tiers. What are we going to include? What are we not going to include? What are the different items that are going to be part of the reward tiers? The shipping rates is going to be this amount for US versus international. Are you going to have any add-ons, which is now a new functionality within the Kickstarter dashboard, right? So there's a few different things that come into play. So I would say that if you budget 3 to 4 weeks to put together a Kickstarter campaign, assuming you're doing this part-time, right? You're doing this after work or you're doing this on the weekends, that's definitely, I think, enough time to put together a really good page. If you do it shorter, you might just need a little bit more time, honestly. So if you're not, if you don't have a full-time job, great, you could probably get it done sooner. But for someone who has an existing business and is trying to do this at the same time or trying to do it part-time after work, probably going to take, I'd say, about 3 weeks to coalesce all of the assets and everything together. And it could even take longer if there are delays, right, with your video editor or things like that. So that's why I recommend getting started sooner rather than later, right? And also, once you begin to get it together, you're gonna have to get it approved by Kickstarter. So that way you can launch without any issues. When you get it approved, you're also gonna get your preview link, right? So there's a little bit of a difference there between imagination and reality, but it's not too big of a difference, honestly. The weeks breeze by, my friend. And if you ever need help, you can always reach out when it comes to putting together a page like that. Number 2 is the reality of the Kickstarter marketplace, right? So when we're first thinking about putting together a page, the reason why most people want to do a Kickstarter campaign is that they want to get access to the marketplace, right? Which is completely understandable because you want to get a bunch of strangers that are backing your platform or backing your project. And what I've seen as a kind of a common mistake for many, many years is a beginning creator just deciding to launch the project. Let's just say they spent those 3 weeks or whatever putting this together, they launch it, and then they're like, okay, now I gotta promote this thing. Where am I gonna promote it? And what ends up happening a lot of the times, unless you are in a very popular category and you have a very well polished page or a very interesting kind of a product of some kind, typically you're gonna launch on Kickstarter, it's gonna be $0 that are funded, and people in the marketplace, I put together some other videos on this, where they're gonna come and they're gonna see that, and they're probably gonna be a lot less likely, honestly, to waste the time watching your pitch video. People like to buy best-selling books. They like to watch top-rated movies by Rotten Tomatoes. They like to do things that other people are doing. They like to go to the steak restaurant in the city, a nice steak restaurant that everyone and all the critics love, right? Same thing goes with crowdfunding. People like to check out pages where a project is starting to trend, is starting to get more and more attention. They don't have so much time necessarily if they're on, let's just say in the middle of the workday and they're on the lunch break and they're looking at some different Kickstarter campaigns. They don't want to invest the time in a campaign that's going to not be an interesting video or anything like that. So more more often than not, if you plan a pre-launch and get some initial funding in the gate, it can really prime the pump. It can really get the engine revving a little bit, before you take off there down the highway. So make sure you do that in order to have a solid launch. Otherwise, you might launch and it might end up being crickets and not as many people approaching it as you want. Another big one when it comes to reality, right, versus fantasy, or like myth versus what's real when it comes to launching a Kickstarter campaign, is the sort of the lead time here, right, and understanding the logistics behind getting a product to the end user. And I think that this is really common with crowdfunding in general. It goes beyond Kickstarter. It's also Indiegogo. It's whether or not you're creating your own product and selling it online in general. There's a lot of steps that happen from the idea of a product to actually getting it into the hands of backers. And there are some people out there who will just like run it and gun it and will launch a campaign and eventually figure out after that how to get the product to them. And that's completely fine. I actually think that's a fine approach, especially if you know that you're going to try and move forward with this project, that you're excited about it and you're really just going for the validation, right? That's fine with me. However, it will help, I think, a little bit if you have a sense of the supply chain. So for example, if you don't know what it costs to manufacture the product, the tooling costs that are necessary maybe for things like injection molding, if you have plastic parts for the product, right? It's gonna then delay your fulfillment a bit. And as well, if you didn't calculate shipping information or those kinds of things, it's gonna again delay fulfillment a bit if you're having some different financial issues there. So when it comes to in general, I think Kickstarter was launched and people thought of it as like an idea platform where you could like get funding for an idea. But in reality, it's more of getting funding for a refined idea, I would say, right? Getting funding for a product that you're going to be shipping in the future, and that you have a sense of how to get that to the backer, at least a little bit, I think will really help you. Otherwise, what's going to end up happening is you might calculate things wrong, not be able to find a good manufacturer, and not being able to deliver on your Kickstarter rewards. You're gonna have a lot of angry backers on your hands, right? So make sure you just do a bit of the prep work ahead of time. If you don't wanna do the prep work, you can always reach out to someone to help you with this. As well, when it comes to shipping and fulfillment, recommend downloading the Fulfill Right checklist I got down below on shipping and fulfillment when it comes to Kickstarter campaigns. It's free, really good, recommend it. Another one has to do with the middle of a campaign, right? So when you go live with a launch, I think most people think of a launch kind of as like you're launching a rocket into outer space, like Elon Musk or something like that. And when you're launching a rocket, like there's a very predefined, stages as it goes throughout the atmosphere, right? It goes from the launch pad and it goes to this stage and that stage, and everything is kind of going up and up, and it's a linear progression. You almost think of it, or even, an exponential progression if you want to think of it that way. Like there's that graph. With most campaigns, and again, there are obviously exceptions to the rule here, with most campaigns, it's not so much like that. It's more of like driving a car, right? So driving a car, you do have like point A and point B, but there are a lot of turns in the road as you're going from point A to point B, and you might be slowing down, you might be speeding up, you might have to stop at a stoplight, you might have to swerve around in traffic, right? There's a lot more like, it's not so linear, and it's kind of more in line with the analogy of what a Kickstarter campaign is, because when you go live in the first couple of days, in the first week, you might get a ton of good influx of pledges, but what about after that? That's what I call the Kickstarter slump of death, where you're having difficulty with momentum. You're like, I don't know what's up, man. I don't know if I picked the wrong product idea. But this is completely natural. It's very, very normal to go through this loss of momentum. There are a lot of things to combat this, right? And a lot of ways to kind of steer clear of this major obstacle in your path. But it is something that you should be aware of, that it's most campaigns, unless they are very good product market fit and have a solid marketing strategy, probably are going to face a little bit of that Kickstarter slump of death. And that's just something to be aware of when it comes to fantasy versus reality. Another kind of fantasy versus reality thing that I just thought of when I was talking about Kickstarter slump of death is the idea of media mentions, right? So I actually made a course called the Complete Crowdfunding PR System, right? And this is all about like PR, media, getting media hits, and that kind of thing. when it comes to media on Kickstarter, in the early days of the platform, it was actually pretty easy, in my opinion, to get media hits. And even now, if you know what you're doing, you can get media hits and use this as a media event. However, a lot more journalists nowadays are much more skeptical of these type of Kickstarter products because they're like, I don't know if this guy is going to get funded. What if we end up covering a campaign that doesn't go so well, or there are issues in the fulfillment phase? I don't want to be associated with that brand, right? So it's not as much of a new hypey thing to just come out with the Kickstarter campaign. Like in the early days, that enough was just an announcement. Like, I'm doing a Kickstarter, people are like, wow, what is that, right? Or coming out with an entirely new product. It's so exciting, like that middle stage that you're in. Nowadays, you might have to send a prototype or a product to a journalist to have them review it before you get into a major media publication. Same thing goes with influencers, right? So some influencers might just cover you if you're doing a paid media kind of buy, but if it's more organic and free, then they might want to sample your product before they introduce that to their audience, right? So this is kind of another area I think that the expectation is like, oh, it's so easy just to get anyone to write about you. And if you have the right project, that might be the case. You're going to get lots of organic media attention. But I'd say for the average Kickstarter campaign, it's a bit of a struggle because many of these journalists, when you approach them, first of all, the open rates, right? You maybe get of 1 out of 10, you maybe get a handful that reply to you, and then of those, like maybe one is interested in actually moving forward. So it's definitely a numbers game, but also it's about the confidence that person has in your organization of writing actually and covering you. So there is a bit of strategy there, goes beyond the scope of this video, but I think I have one course on PR that I will include down below if that's going to be helpful for you. The next bit of fantasy versus reality is what happens after a campaign, right? So I think in the fantasy world, we're gonna do a massive campaign and then we're gonna come out with the product and then it's gonna be a super smooth transition into e-commerce and like everything's gonna go swimmingly, right? And it's just gonna be like off to the races. And obviously I'm a pretty, motivational guy. I have a lot of YouTube videos out there that are more positive in nature. But with this video, I really just wanna give you like the bare bones, I think, of what's important for you to know. And that's a lot of the times there are delays. And this is normal. There are delays when it comes to shipping. There are delays when it comes to manufacturing. You might have a major pandemic or something that happens that all of a sudden increases freight rates or shipping rates or rates when it comes to airplanes and like all that kind of stuff because there are less that are being flown and it's harder to get your products on board. You might have a Chinese New Year, right, which happens and then it delays your manufacturing schedule. So there are a lot of different worldwide events that you can be beholden to when you're doing e-commerce and e-commerce fulfillment. And that's completely natural, right? But one of the things that I think is important is that whatever you think you're probably gonna go live with your e-commerce store, it's gonna usually be a bit delayed. And this is something that is kind of like similar with my own projects. Like if I'm writing a new book, let's just say, and I have a deadline for that book, I know, I'm like virtually guaranteed that I'm probably gonna push that deadline back a bit. It might even only be by like 2 weeks, but it might be by a month, it might be by 2 months, but that's okay. It's okay as long as you have deadlines. That is the main thing, is that you need to have milestones and deadlines when it comes to projects that you're working on, right? So with the campaign, what you should be aware of is while there can be delays, there are also other tools available to help you so that you do capitalize on that momentum. So one might be, for example, Indiegogo in demand, right? Going and porting your campaign over to Indiegogo in demand so that way you can continue selling it through that vehicle and you continue gathering pledges and racking it up that way. The other would be, setting up something like using CrowdOx or BackerKit or one of these other tools in order to upsell creators or backers when they're checking out with your pledge and you're gathering all their survey information or continuing to raise funds that way, right? So there's a lot of different options. Indiegogo in demand is definitely more of a common one, I'd say, after doing a Kickstarter. But you could also, if you want to do pre-selling on your own website, there are a lot of ways that you can navigate the terrain. But just keep in mind, you don't have to go straight to e-commerce. And if there are delays, that's okay. There are ways and techniques to deal with that gap in time. Okay, the last one I want to go through on this reality versus fantasy is that this is another thing that I kind of, a trap that I fell into when I was in my younger days, right? So in my younger days, I thought everything was about numbers, like getting big numbers, lots of subscribers, lots of page views. I remember the first time I had like 100,000 page views on my blog in a month. I was like, oh my gosh, this is insane. Like, to think about that many people around the world discovering your work, and like just the idea, the concept that many people were reading my writing, it was like so cool to me. I mean, this is back in like 2012, 2013, and I was just really excited to be able to see that. But what I realized over time, working also with a lot of creators, is that it doesn't matter. Big numbers really don't matter. What matters more is engagement and conversion. So you could have, for example, a list of like 100,000 people that are following you on social media and all these other, avenues and venues and stuff like that. But if only a very small percentage of those people convert into buyers, that's kind of all that matters. I've actually worked with a lot of people who have like 1 million Instagram followers, hundreds of thousands of IG followers, and they launch a campaign and it's like, it like doesn't really translate. So it's not so much about followers, it's about engagement and getting them on into the right marketing vehicles and getting them to convert on your campaign page. If you actually do the math, and obviously I don't know about your specific product category, I don't know too much about what it is you're trying to accomplish and how much you're trying to raise. Let's just say you're trying to raise, ballpark like 6 figures, right? It's very easy for you to work backwards the math and to figure out how many backers you need. And I'm willing to bet that if you're like most people out there, and you're creating a product, let's just say for $100, if you are able to attract 1,000 backers at the $100 mark, you're gonna hit a 100K campaign. Let's just say it's even less. Let's say it's $200 price point, right? $200 price point and 1,000 backers, you're gonna be able to hit your goal. So you could have 200, you could have 500 backers at the $200 price point. You're gonna be able to hit your 6-figure goal, right? So it's not so much about like big numbers. Like, obviously it would be great to have like 10,000 backers on Kickstarter, and if you have a low price product, maybe that would be incredible, right? But at the same time, for most creators that are out there, you don't necessarily need like tens of thousands of people. You don't need millions of people. It's more like you need hundreds, right? Or at the most you need 1,000 or 2,000 or in the thousands range, right? And even if you're a smaller creator, let's just say that you're only trying to raise $50,000, right? You could do that pretty easily by just hitting the $250 backers at the $200 pledge level, right? If my math holds out. So under that scenario, let's just say that you are able to attract the 250 backers, $200 price point, you just generated $50,000 in revenue in pre-orders, right? For your business. So it's not so like, I wouldn't, I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see is the focus on vanity metrics of like lots of views, lots of promotion, lots of marketing, lots of big numbers of, influencers and social media and stuff. It's more about that end of the funnel number, which is how many people really are willing to support and really buy. And you don't necessarily need big numbers in order to have a success on your hands. Hope you enjoyed this YouTube video. My name is Salvador Briggman. Go and check out some of the other videos I got out there. Give me a thumbs up, leave a comment down below if you have any questions, and I will see you next time.